Billionaire. Father sees black waitress. Let his disabled son lead a dance step, and his life changes. The chandeliers of the Larchmont Grand Hotel spilled golden light onto the polished marble floor, where champagne glasses chimed and violins whispered beneath the hum of conversation. It was the kind of night where everyone wore their best masks. The diamond smile, the poised laugh, the air of importance that came with a $5,000 seat at a charity gala. At the far edge of the ballroom, Amara Johnson glided between tables with a practiced grace, balancing trays heavy with flutes of bubbly. She wore the standard black and white uniform, crisp but not new, the collar pressing lightly against her throat. Her natural hair was twisted into a neat bun, though a few curls had escaped to frame her warm brown eyes. She kept her posture straight, chin lifted. It was easier to bear the occasional cold glance if she looked like she belonged. This was her third 12-hour shift in a row. Her knees ached, a souvenir from an injury that had ended her dance scholarship 8 years ago. But she hid it well. She had learned to make each step look purposeful, each smile real enough to pass. And as this story unfolds, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these stories. Post your location and local time in the comments below. Near the center of the room, Richard Cross stood like a man accustomed to owning the air around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver at his temples, and wrapped in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Amara's annual rent. The billionaire was holding court, leaning slightly toward a hedge fund director, his hand resting absently on the back of a velvet chair. Beside him, almost swallowed by the table's height, sat Ethan, 11 years old, hair the color of summer wheat, eyes as blue as the cut glass on the tea. Abel's. His wheelchair was polished, but he seemed small in it, hands folded in his lap as if he were trying to disappear. His father had introduced him to several guests that evening, always with the same brisk tone. "My son, Ethan." No one had asked Ethan a question in return. Amara first noticed the boy when she passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. His gaze wasn't on the food or the guests, but on the dance floor. Couples swirled in gowns and tuxedos, the music swelling in elegant 3/4 time. His eyes tracked the movement like someone watching sunlight through leaves, curious, hungry, aching. She stopped beside his table, lowering her voice so as not to draw attention. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan startled a little, then looked up at her. "I've never danced before." "Why not?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "Dad says it's not safe." Her chest tightened. "Dancing's not about perfect steps," she said. "It's about feeling the music. You can do that sitting down." For a moment he looked doubtful. Then she set her tray down on a side table, knelt so they were eye level, and held out her hands. "Want to try?" Ethan glanced toward his father, still deep in conversation, back half turned, then nodded. Slowly he placed his hands in hers. She began to sway her arms, guiding him into a gentle rhythm. He caught on quickly, taking the lead, his movements small but confident. She let him direct, following his cues. Something shifted in his face, a spark of joy breaking through the shyness, the kind of light that doesn't ask permission. A couple nearby noticed and smiled, but at another table, a woman in pearls whispered to her companion, eyes narrowing. And then Richard Cross turned. His eyes landed on his son, on the waitress kneeling beside him, on the way they moved together. The smile faded from his face. He strode toward them, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. The warmth in Ethan's expression faltered. Amara straightened, but didn't let go of the boy's hands until Richard stopped beside them. "What exactly is going on here?" Richard's voice was low, controlled. "I was just showing him," Amara began. "You were overstepping," he cut in, his gaze sharp as glass. He turned the wheelchair slightly. "Come on, Ethan, back to the table." Ethan's voice rose, thin but firm. "She let me lead." Richard froze for a fraction of a second, but then he pushed the chair away. Amara stood where she was, the music still playing around her, her hands empty and warm from where his had been. The rest of the night moved like a river of glass, smooth on the surface, sharp underneath. Amara kept working, the tray a familiar weight against her palm, but she felt the burn of Richard Cross's stare from across the room. At table 14, Ethan sat in silence, his gaze on the floor. The plates before him went mostly untouched, Every so often he glanced at the dance floor, then at his father, then back again, like a bird testing the air before flight. Richard, meanwhile, was a master at pretending nothing had happened. He laughed easily with other guests, clinked glasses with an investment banker, even made a show of congratulating the gala director on the turnout. But every so often, his eyes flicked toward Amara, not with curiosity, but with the cool assessment of a man who didn't appreciate being challenged in his own sphere. During a lull in serving, Amara ducked into the staff corridor that wound behind the ballroom. The hum of the party faded to the clink of dishes and the hiss of the industrial dishwasher. She leaned against the wall, rubbing her knee absently. She thought about Ethan's hands in hers, the way he'd straightened in his chair when he realized he could lead. It had been such a small thing, but for him, it had felt like everything. When she returned to the ballroom, the music had shifted to something slower, sweeter. A waltz. Amara caught Ethan watching. Again, the longing in his expression more obvious now. His father was distracted by a conversation with a city councilman. She wanted to walk over, to whisper something encouraging. But the sting of their earlier encounter still lingered. The unspoken hierarchy of the gala was clear. Staff served, guests mingled. A shrill laugh snapped her attention to the table nearest the bar. Two women in satin gowns were watching her approach. "Careful," one murmured just loud enough. "She might try to teach you to dance." The other tittered behind her champagne flute. Amara kept her face neutral, setting down their drinks without a word. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting in the moment. Across the room, Ethan was fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. His father leaned down, speaking to him in a tone too low to catch, but whatever he said made Ethan's shoulders slump. It was then the master of ceremonies announced the evening's open floor session, a tradition where donors and their families could join the dance. Couples began stepping out, the skirts of their gowns sweeping like tides. Ethan's eyes lit up briefly, then dimmed. Richard didn't move. Amara swallowed the impulse to cross the room. Instead, she refilled a tray with glasses and began weaving between the dancers. But when she passed near Ethan's table, she saw it. The tiniest movement of his hand, almost a wave, almost a plea. Richard noticed too. His brow furrowed. "Ethan, we've discussed this," Amara heard him say. "It's not..." But Ethan's voice was firmer this time. "You're not listening to me." Heads turned. A few guests nearby paused mid-step. Richard's jaw tightened, the kind of expression that could shut down a boardroom in seconds. "Enough," he said, pushing back from the table. Amara stepped away, pretending to busy herself with a nearby couple, but her pulse quickened. Caned. That flicker of defiance in Ethan's voice wasn't something you saw every day, and it wasn't going to vanish quietly. The music swelled, and somewhere in the crowd someone whispered, "The crossboy wants to dance." The words traveled faster than the violins, threading through the guests, until a ring of curiosity began to form. And Richard Cross, billionaire, untouchable, utterly in control, found himself standing in the center of a room where, for once, the script wasn't his to write. The music seemed to swell around the tension, the waltz's gentle rise and fall contrasting sharply with the scene unfolding. Ethan sat straighter in his wheelchair, gripping the arms not out of fear, but with a resolve that surprised even him. He looked from his father to the dance floor and back again, his jaw set the way kids do when they've decided they're done asking for permission. Richard's voice dropped low, meant only for his son, but the silence of those nearest made the words carry. "This isn't the place for..." "It's exactly the place," Ethan cut in. Gasps rippled through the ring of onlookers. Some masked it with polite sips of champagne, others leaned in. At a gala full of practiced manners, a boy contradicting his father, a man like Richard Cross, was rare enough to be its own spectacle. Amara froze mid-step at the far end of the dance floor. She could feel eyes darting between her and Ethan, as if some unspoken thread connected them. She'd seen enough kids in her neighborhood fight to be heard over the noise of adults. She recognized the courage it took to speak now in this room. Richard crouched down to be level with his son, a calculated move to make the moment look gentler than it was. "Ethan," he said quietly, "you don't understand how people will..." "How you'll look," Ethan shot back. His voice was small in volume but sharp in truth. The jab landed. Richard's eyes flickered. Not with anger this time, but with something more complicated. Still, he straightened, smoothed, had his suit jacket, and turned to face the curious guests. "Enjoy your evening," he said briskly, trying to disperse the attention. But it was too late. The moment had teeth now. People were watching not because they wanted to see a scandal, but because they sensed the edges of something rare. A boy asking to live beyond the cage of protection. Ethan reached for his wheels. "If you won't come with me," he said, "I'll go by myself." The collective intake of breath was audible. Richard's hand hovered near the chair handles, but didn't grip them. From across the room, Amara saw the tiny hitch in Ethan's forward push, the slight angle of the floor making it harder to roll onto the open dance area. Without thinking, she crossed the space, tray tucked under one arm. "I've got you," she murmured, placing a steadying hand on the back of his chair. Richard's head whipped toward her. "I told you," Ethan interrupted, louder now. "I want her to." And just like that, the dynamic shifted again. The boy who was always led wanted to lead. The waitress who was told to keep her distance was being asked forward. A murmur swept the room, not malicious this time, but electric with curiosity. Somewhere near the band, the conductor glanced at his players and gave a subtle nod. The music swelled brighter, warmer. Richard's mouth pressed into a thin line. He could stop it. He could reclaim control. But to do so here, now, in front of eyes that suddenly seemed less impressed by his wealth than by his response. His hesitation was all the invitation Ethan needed. He looked up at Amara and said, "Will you dance with me?" The way he said it wasn't about performance or rebellion anymore. It was about being seen. Amara knelt beside him, meeting his gaze, her voice steady. "You lead? I'll follow." And as they rolled toward the center of the floor, a ripple of anticipation passed through. The room. The kind that comes right before something you know you'll remember for the rest of your life. The circle of guests widened instinctively, creating a pocket of space in the middle of the polished marble floor. The chandeliers above seemed to burn brighter, their light catching on sequins and crystal glassware, but all of it blurred into background. The only clear thing was the boy in the wheelchair and the black waitress kneeling beside him, her hand resting lightly in his. The band caught on to the moment without a word. The violins softened, the piano's notes stretched into something slow and regal. It was no longer a waltz for couples in gowns. It was a score for courage. Ethan's hands were small but steady. He began to move one arm side to side, a makeshift leading gesture Amara had shown him earlier. She followed without hesitation, letting his rhythm dictate hers. Her body swayed in perfect time, the crisp folds of her uniform shirt moving like silk against the backdrop of swirling gowns. And then something happened. The boy's movements grew bolder, not frantic, not showy, but sure. The chair became less of a boundary and more of a chariot, his motions painting invisible arcs in the air. Amara matched them, her gaze never leaving his, nodding encouragement with each change in tempo. Somewhere near the back, a woman dabbed her eyes. A man in a tux leaned forward, whispering to his partner, "Do you see his face?" Yes, his face. The quiet, guarded boy was gone. In his place was someone alive with the music, lit from within by the simple fact that he was in control. Richard Cross stood at the edge of the circle, his arms stiff at his sides. His expression was unreadable at first, but the longer he watched, the more it began to crack. His son's joy wasn't a small thing. It was a force, the kind of thing that made the edges of his carefully ordered world feel porous. The violins climbed toward a tender peak, and Amara took one step back, giving Ethan and the space to turn his chair in a slow half-circle. The crowd's breath seemed to catch as he executed the move with precision. A few clapped softly. Richard's jaw flexed. Then, almost imperceptibly, he stepped forward. His shoes clicked against the marble, each sound a quiet surrender of pride. When he reached them, he didn't stop at the edge. He crouched beside his son and placed one hand gently on his shoulder. Ethan glanced up, surprised. Richard didn't say a word. Instead, he took his son's free hand in his own. The music swelled, and the three of them moved together. Not perfectly, not in any formal style, but with something that drew the entire room into stillness. By the time the last note faded, the applause rose like a tide. It wasn't polite or restrained. It was the sound of people moved beyond expectation. Richard's eyes glistened. He cleared his throat, turning to Amara. "Thank you," he said, his voice just above a whisper, but the kind that carries when the room is silent. "You gave my son something I didn't know how to give him." Ethan grinned, the first full, unguarded smile of the night, and squeezed both their hands. In that moment, the billionaire didn't look like a man above anyone else. He looked like a father who had been shown his son for the first time. The applause still lingered in the air as guests exchanged glances. Not the thin-lipped smirks of gossip, but the widened eyes of people who'd just witnessed something real. Even the waitstaff, trained to keep moving no matter what unfolded in the room, slowed their pace to watch. Amara eased back, letting Ethan bask in the glow of the moment. The boy's face was still lit with a kind of joy that seemed to erase the hours he'd spent quietly fading into the background earlier. His small hands flexed like they were memorizing the shape of freedom. Richard rose to his full height, Timonite. He weight of the crowd's attention heavy on his shoulders. In a world where every public moment was calculated, he was suddenly standing in one that wasn't planned, and wasn't about him. He looked around, as if bracing for judgment, but instead saw faces softened, nods of quiet approval, and even the occasional tear. A few donors he'd fought to impress earlier now seemed far more interested in his son than in his portfolio. One older man in a charcoal suit stepped forward and clapped Richard on the back. "Beautiful moment, Rich. Never seen you on the floor before." Richard's mouth opened, then closed again. "It wasn't me," he admitted. His eyes shifted to Amara. "She started it." That small acknowledgement sent a ripple through the guests. The same pearls and champagne set that had dismissed Amara earlier now studied her differently. Not as just a server in a pressed shirt, but as the catalyst for something that had softened a man they thought was made of steel. Ethan, however, wasn't done. "Dad," he said, tugging on his father's sleeve. "Can we keep going? Not tonight. I mean, in general. Dancing, moving. I want to do more." The question seemed to knock Richard slightly off balance. "We'll see," he said automatically, the old reflex of control slipping back in. But Ethan didn't shrink away this time. He held his father's gaze, waiting for something better than a deflection. Richard looked at Amara again. "You teach?" Her brows lifted. "Not for money. I run a free weekend class at the rec center. Mostly kids from the neighborhood." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Can I go?" It was such a simple question, but it came with the quiet authority of someone who'd just been told by the whole room, through their applause, through their attention, that his voice mattered. Richard hesitated, scanning the faces still watching him. He wasn't used to decisions that weren't on his terms. Finally, he gave a single nod. "We'll talk about it," he said, but the tone was softer now, almost willing. The MC's voice cut through, announcing the final bidding round for the charity auction. The spell of the moment loosened, the crowd gradually breaking apart, but something had shifted that wouldn't vanish with the change of music. As Amara returned to her work, she caught Ethan watching her, mouthing a silent "thank you." She smiled back, a small, private agreement between them that the night had changed more than just the atmosphere of the gala. From across the room, Richard stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on his son. He looked like a man calculating something far more personal than profit margins. The gala wound down under the slow dimming of the chandeliers. Guests collected coats and gift bags, their conversations drifting from the charity's mission to the night's unexpected centerpiece, the dance. Amara cleared tables, stacking plates with the quiet efficiency of someone invisible again. Though tonight invisibility didn't feel the same. She could feel it in the way people's eyes lingered when she passed, in the nods from guests who hours ago wouldn't have remembered her face. Near the ballroom entrance, Richard stood with Ethan, waiting for their car. But instead of scrolling through his phone or scanning the crowd for someone worth speaking to, he was crouched, listening to his son talk about the music, the feel of leading, the moment when everyone was clapping just for him. When their eyes met across the room, Richard didn't look away. He gave her a short, deliberate nod. Not the curt acknowledgement of an employer to staff, something closer to respect. Minutes later, as she was refilling the coffee station, she heard his voice behind her. "Miss Johnson, was it?" She turned, tray in hand. "Yes, sir." He gestured toward a quieter corner. "May I have a word?" Amara followed, conscious of the curious glances from other staff. Richard's tone was measured, but there was an unfamiliar note beneath it. Humility, maybe, or the effort of a man not used to saying what he was about to. I owe you an apology. I was abrupt earlier. I've spent a lot of years protecting Ethan, and somewhere along the way I forgot that protection without freedom isn't living. She studied him for a beat, weighing whether the apology was for her or for his own conscience. He's capable of more than people think, she said simply. I can see that now. Richard's gaze flicked briefly to the dance floor, now nearly empty. He wants to come to your classes. If you're willing, I'd like to make that happen. Amara's first instinct was to say yes, but something in her held back. They're free, she reminded him. That's the point. Richard nodded slowly. Then maybe you'll let me help in another way. Equipment, space, whatever you need. Not as a handout. As an investment. The word carried weight coming from him. Before she could answer, Ethan rolled up beside them, cheeks flushed with excitement. I told Dad we could start this weekend. Amara crouched down to his level, smiling. You lead, I'll follow, remember? Ethan nodded vigorously. For a moment, Richard simply watched the two of them. His son's joy, her steady warmth, and something uncoiled in his expression. When the cross-car finally arrived, Richard shook her hand, his grip firm but not overpowering. You've changed the way I see him, he said quietly. And maybe the way I see myself. Amara didn't answer right away. She just met his eyes, letting the silence say what it needed to. As they left, she realized the ballroom felt different now. Not brighter, not grander, but real in a way it hadn't been when the night began. The first Saturday morning of the new arrangement dawned clear and cold, sunlight slicing through the tall windows of the Nagy H. Boorhood Recreation Center. The gym floor smelled faintly of polish and old basketballs, but the corner where Amara's dance group met had been transformed. Folding chairs for parents, a speaker humming softly with warm-up music, and a space taped out for movement. Amara stood in her usual place, sneakers instead of serving shoes, her hair loose in soft curls. Around her, a mix of kids were already laughing and stretching, most from the surrounding blocks, some shy newcomers brought in by word of mouth. And then the doors opened, and Ethan rolled in. He was bundled in a sweatshirt and jeans, his hair still damp from the morning shower. Behind him came Richard, not in his usual armor of tailored suits, but in a simple sweater and dark slacks. He looked out of place in the peeling paint gym, but not uncomfortable. Ethan's eyes scanned the room, wide with the thrill of being somewhere that wasn't designed around limitations. When he spotted Amara, he rolled straight over. You ready to let me lead again? He asked. She grinned. Every step. The class began, music spilling bright and steady through the speakers. Amara guided the group in arm movements, turns, and rhythms that adapted to each body in the room. When it was Ethan's turn to try a sequence, the others watched, and then followed his lead without hesitation. Richard stood at the edge, hands in his pockets, the faintest smile pulling at his mouth. There was pride there, yes, but also something deeper, the quiet relief of a man realizing he no longer had to shield his son from the world, because his son was learning to meet it head-on. At the halfway point, Amara brought the group into a circle. Dance is about connection, she told them, about listening and trusting and letting each person's story move the rest of us. Her gaze flicked briefly to Richard before returning to the kids. And sometimes, it's about letting go enough to follow someone else's rhythm. The session ended with applause, not the polite kind from the gala, but the messy, joyful noise of kids clapping and whooping for each other. After the class, as parents collected their children, Richard approached. I'll have my assistant reach out about equipment and space, but I want you to keep it yours, the way it is now. That's what makes it work. Amara nodded, understanding the unspoken admission in his words. Ethan wheeled up beside them, cheeks flushed from the effort. Same time next week? Amara leaned down, smiling. Same time, and I expect you to bring new moves. As father and son headed toward the door, Richard glanced back once. It wasn't a look of ownership or control, just gratitude. When the gym fell quiet again, Amara stayed a while, coiling the extension cords, stacking chairs. She thought of the night at the Larchmont Grand, the gilded ballroom, the boy at the edge of the floor. And she thought of this morning, the sunlight, the circle of kids, the music that belonged to everyone. Sometimes, she realized, the smallest acts, offering your hands, letting someone lead, can change the shape of an entire life. And in this case, too.